She was 6 months pregnant, glowing with the kind of joy that makes a woman believe the world is finally working in her favor, when she opened the bedroom door and found her husband tangled in the sheets with another woman. No screaming, no tears, just silence so absolute it felt like the air had been vacuumed out of the room. Serena Whitmore had built her entire life around Damian Russo. She had loved a man who ran an empire built on blood and lies, and never once asked the wrong questions. Until tonight. If this story hits you somewhere real, hit that like button and drop your city in the comments. I want to see how far this reaches. Now stay with me. You need to hear what happens next. The flight from Milan landed 40 minutes early, and Serena took it as a sign. She had been trying to read signs for 7 months now. In the way the morning light hit the bathroom tiles, in the particular silence of an ultrasound room before the technician moved the wand. She had become a woman who needed the universe to confirm things it had no obligation to confirm. That was what pregnancy had done to her. It had cracked her open in ways she hadn't expected and filled those cracks with something she couldn't name. Tenderness, maybe. Or fear dressed up so carefully it passed for tenderness. She pressed her palm flat against her belly as the plane taxied toward the gate. 6 months and 3 weeks. The baby moved in low, rolling waves now, nothing like the sharp jabs of earlier months. The OB in Milan had called it a healthy sign. Active, she'd said, like the word meant something beyond the clinical. Like the baby was already deciding who she was going to be. A girl. They'd found out 4 days ago. Serena had been alone in the exam room when the technician told her, and she had laughed, actually laughed out loud, this sudden involuntary burst that surprised even her, because she had been so certain it was a boy. She'd had a whole idea of a boy in her head, dark-eyed like Damian, quiet and watchful. Instead, a girl. And Serena had driven back to the hotel through the streets of Milan and sat on the edge of the bed and thought, she will know exactly what she's worth from the very beginning. She had decided that in the room before she'd even called Damian to tell him. She had decided it first for herself. She hadn't told him yet. She'd wanted to see his face. That was the only reason she'd come home 3 days early. She couldn't wait. Couldn't hold it inside for 3 more days, the way she'd been holding everything inside for so long. Serena Whitmore, who did not cry in public, who did not make scenes, who had learned in the first year of her marriage that a mafia boss's wife absorbed things rather than expelled them. She was done absorbing for tonight. Tonight she wanted to give Damian something that would make him put down whatever he was carrying and just be present. A girl, his daughter. She hadn't told the driver to call ahead. She'd wanted that too. The surprise. The look on his face before he had time to arrange it. The car moved through the Chicago night with that particular smoothness that Damian's drivers had, never above the speed limit, never below. Serena watched the city through the tinted window. She'd grown up in the city, in a narrow house in Bridgeport with a cracked front stoop and a mother who worked 2 jobs, and now she moved through it in armored black SUVs and felt sometimes like she was watching it on television, like it was a city she used to live in. The estate sat behind iron gates on the North Shore, 45 minutes from the airport when there was no traffic. There was no traffic at 11:40 at night. The driver punched the gate code without being asked, and the gates swung open, and the house came into view through the tree line. All lit glass and clean limestone, the kind of house that was designed to communicate something about the man who owned it without the man having to say a word. "I'll take my bags up myself," she told the driver when he stopped at the front entrance. "Don't bother Martinez." She meant it as a kindness. She would think about that later. She would think about every small decision that led her up those stairs. The foyer was quiet. The housekeeper had gone to bed, and the security rotation this time of night was mostly perimeter. She knew the rhythms of this house better than she knew anything. She'd had nothing but time to learn them. She set her carry-on by the base of the staircase and took off her shoes because the marble was cold, and she wanted to feel something real under her feet, some actual physical sensation to anchor her in the moment. She was about to tell her husband he was going to have a daughter. She wanted to be present for it. She went up the stairs with one hand on the rail and the other resting on the curve of her belly, and she was already composing his expression in her mind. The specific way Damian's face went still when something genuinely surprised him, the half-second delay before the emotion caught up to his features. and she was smiling to herself as she turned down the hall toward the master suite. The door was not fully closed. She registered that first. A 2-inch gap, a sliver of amber light from the bedside lamp inside. Damien almost never slept with the door open. She had a rule about it herself, actually, a vague anxiety about sleeping in a house where things could come through doors unchecked. It was the one neurosis her therapist had never quite gotten her to release. She pushed the door open. She saw the woman's hair first, dark against the white pillow, fanned out with the particular artlessness of something genuinely abandoned. Then Damien's shoulder, the tattoo that ran from his neck to his left shoulder blade, the one she had traced with her fingertip 1,000 times in the dark. And then the whole picture assembled itself with horrible efficiency, the way bad things always do, the mind cutting straight through its own defenses when the evidence is irrefutable. Serena stood in the doorway. She didn't scream. She didn't make a sound. She had always prided herself on that, the ability to contain, and apparently the conditioning ran deep enough that even this couldn't break it. Damien was asleep. The woman beside him was asleep. The room smelled like something expensive and biological and entirely specific, and Serena stood there for 4 seconds, maybe 5, with her hand still resting on the swell of her belly where their daughter was beginning her rolling, healthy evening movements. Then she backed out of the doorway. She pulled the door softly closed behind her. She walked back down the hallway and down the stairs, put her shoes back on, and sat down on the bottom step of that grand limestone staircase and looked at her hands in her lap. She did not cry. She was aware of this as she sat there. She kept waiting for it, the wave, the dissolution, the thing that was supposed to happen when your life broke apart, and it didn't come. What came instead was a cold, clarifying stillness, the kind she imagined a surgeon must feel when a complication arises mid-operation. No room for panic, just the next step and then the next. She sat on that step for 11 minutes. She counted them on the grandfather clock that stood in the foyer, a wedding gift from Damien's father, a brutal old man named Victor who had never once looked at her like she was a permanent fixture. She counted 11 minutes, and then she stood up, picked up her carry-on, and walked out the front door. She called a car from the driveway. She did not go back inside. The hotel was a Marriott 15 minutes from the estate. Not the kind of place Serena Whitmore had stayed in the past 7 years, but she paid cash from the emergency envelope she kept in her carry-on because Damien had taught her that you always kept cash. You always had a route out. You always thought 3 steps ahead. He had meant it as doctrine for a different kind of emergency. The lesson held. She unpacked nothing. She sat in the desk chair by the window with her shoes still on and her coat still buttoned and the bedside lamp off. And she watched the parking lot below and the orange glow of the highway beyond it, and she let her mind do what it needed to do. It needed to go backward first. That was unavoidable. It went backward through 7 years of marriage, the good years at the beginning, the apartment on the Gold Coast before the estate, the way Damien used to make coffee badly and hand it to her without apology, the way she had found that infuriating and then charming and then just part of the texture of being with him. It went through the years she had learned what he actually was, not a real estate developer, not primarily, and the specific mechanics of how she had absorbed that knowledge and filed it away and continued loving him anyway, because she had already built herself around him by then, and the alternative was a kind of demolition she hadn't been ready for. It went through the smaller suspicions. The phone left face down on the counter, the business trips that ran a day longer than scheduled, the particular blankness in his face when she asked casual questions. She had let herself believe those were the ordinary textures of being married to a man who did what Damien did, the necessary distances, the operational security she wasn't entitled to understand. She had told herself that. She had been meticulous about telling herself that. And she had been 6 months pregnant, flying back from Milan with news that she had thought would matter, and he had been asleep in their bed with another woman. Serena put her hand on her belly and felt her daughter move. "Okay," she said, to herself or to the baby, or to no one. "Okay." She picked up her phone. She called her sister Claire, who answered on the 4th ring with the groggy alarm of someone who reads bad news into late calls. "Serena, what's wrong?" "Nothing is wrong," Serena said, and her voice was steady. She noticed that, steady in a way that frightened her a little. "I need a lawyer, a family lawyer, The best one you know. Silence. Claire was 34, 3 years older than Serena, a structural engineer who approached every problem like it was a load-bearing calculation. She was quiet for a moment, and then she said, "How bad?" "Manageable," Serena said. "When do you need the name?" "Tomorrow morning." Another beat of silence. "I'll text you before 7, Claire said. "Are you safe?" Serena almost laughed. Of all the questions to ask. She said yes, and she meant it physically, and she did not think about all the other ways a person could be unsafe. She didn't sleep that night. She sat in the desk chair until the sky outside began to gray, and when her phone lit with Claire's text at 6:53, "Margaret Holloway, Holloway and Crane. She's handled 3 mobster divorces. She doesn't flinch." Serena read it and nodded to herself and went to shower. She stood under the water with her hands flat on the tile and her forehead tipped forward, and she let herself have 5 minutes. Not to cry. The crying still wouldn't come, and she had stopped waiting for it. Just 5 minutes of standing still and feeling the water and being honest with herself about what was true. Her husband had cheated on her. This was not the first time. She knew it wasn't the first time. She knew it the same way you know something you've been refusing to look at directly, through peripheral evidence, through the shape of a thing you never let yourself name. She was 6 months and 3 weeks pregnant with his child, a girl. She was going to leave him. She was going to take her daughter, and she was going to leave, and she was going to do it so cleanly and so completely that when it was over, he would know that she had never made a decision she didn't mean. 5 minutes. Then she turned off the water. Damien called for the first time at 9:17 in the morning. Serena was sitting in Margaret Holloway's office on the 42nd floor of a building downtown, filling out a preliminary intake form in handwriting that was steadier than she felt. She watched Damien's name light up on her screen, and she hit the side button to silence it and set the phone face down on the leather arm of the chair and kept writing. Holloway was a compact woman in her mid-50s with iron gray hair cut close to her head and the particular stillness of someone who had heard everything and was surprised by nothing. She had listened to Serena's summary without interrupting, and when Serena finished, she said, "You said manageable. Do you mean the divorce or the organization?" "Both." Holloway's expression didn't change. "He has resources." "So do I," Serena said. "I've been paying attention for 7 years." That was the truest thing she had said since walking out of that house. She had paid attention. She had learned the names of the lawyers and the accountants and the shell companies, not because she planned to use them, but because she was constitutionally incapable of living in a system without understanding how it worked. She had mapped Damien's empire the way she might map an unfamiliar city, not with the intention of ever having to navigate it alone, just because she couldn't be in a place without knowing where the exits were. Now she was going to need the exits. "Full custody?" Holloway asked. "Full, physical and legal." "And the financials?" "Equitable distribution, whatever the law provides. I'm not interested in his money beyond what's fair." Holloway made a note. "He won't see it that way." "I know." Serena set down her pen. "He never sees anything the way it actually is." The second call came at 9:45. Then a third at 10:03. By the time she walked out of Holloway's office at 11:30 with a case number and a preliminary timeline, there were 11 missed calls and 2 text messages. The first text said, "Where are you?" The second said, "Serena, please call me." No explanation, no confession, just the assumption that she would respond, that his wanting her to respond was sufficient gravity to pull her back. She blocked the number and hailed a cab. She went back to the estate that afternoon with Claire and 2 colleagues of Claire's husband who were large and quiet and stood near the door while Serena moved through the house with a measured efficiency that frightened her a little. How quickly she had become someone who could catalog 7 years of a life into what mattered and what didn't. She took her mother's photographs. She took her own laptop and the external drives that held her personal files. She took the jewelry that had been gifts from her mother or purchased with her own money. She left everything Damien had given her, every piece, on the dresser in perfect rows with a clarity that felt, in the moment, like the most honest thing she'd ever done. She took her daughter's things, the items she'd been collecting slowly over the past months, the soft things and small things folded in a drawer in the spare room she'd been quietly assembling into a nursery. She took 3 hours. She left no note. Damien arrived home as she was carrying the last box to Claire's car. She heard the gate open and didn't stop moving. She put the box in the trunk and turned around, and he was already out of the car, crossing the driveway with the particular energy of a man who had been burning with something all day. Panic, she thought, or its cousin. And he was still in his suit from wherever he'd been. The tie loosened, and she recognized the look on his face because she'd cataloged every expression he owned. He was afraid. Good. Serena. He stopped 6 feet from her. The two men near the front door shifted, and Damien clocked them, and something passed through his face. Shame, maybe, or anger at being managed. And then he looked back at her. Just talk to me. There's nothing to say, she said. There is. There is plenty to say. Just come inside. I'm not going inside. Then here. Right here. Just... He made a gesture she recognized, the open hand thing he did when he was trying to appear reasonable. She had always found it persuasive before. I know what you saw. Good, she said. Then you know what this is. Serena. His voice dropped. The Mafia Boss voice, not threatening, something worse, something intimate and urgent and designed to reach her at the frequency she'd been tuned to for 7 years. Please. She looked at him for a long moment. She let herself look at him directly, at the face she had loved, at the man she had organized her entire life around, and she felt the full weight of what was happening. Not sadness, not anger, something larger and colder than both, something that felt like clarity expanding to fill every available space inside her. My lawyer will be in touch, she said. Don't call me. She got in the car. She didn't look back as they pulled out through the gate. The divorce filing hit him 3 days later. Serena knew because Claire monitored the process server's report and texted her a timestamp, 9:47 a.m., signed receipt confirmed. He knows. What Serena didn't know, what she couldn't have known yet, was what he would do with the knowing. She was staying in Claire's guest room in Lincoln Square, a neighborhood she'd grown up adjacent to, sleeping badly in the particular way of late pregnancy and shock, lying on her left side the way the OB had instructed with a pillow between her knees. Her daughter moved at night. The rolling waves she was starting to recognize as a pattern, and Serena would lie still and pay attention to them the way she'd trained herself to pay attention to things, precisely, without interpretation, just collecting what was true. She was going to be a mother in 11 weeks. She was going to be a mother alone. She let herself sit with that, not catastrophizing, not yet, just holding the fact of it and feeling its actual weight rather than the performed version she might have shown anyone else. It was heavy, it was real, and it was also, under all of it, survivable. She had come from less than this. She had come from a cracked front stoop and a mother who worked 2 jobs in a neighborhood that trained you in the specific discipline of getting through things that weren't supposed to be gotten through. She was Serena Whitmore before she was Serena Russo. She was going to remember that. She fell asleep near 2 in the morning, and when she woke up, there was a message waiting on the legal line Holloway had set up. Not from Damien, but from his attorney, a man named Preston Cole, who had been doing Damien's legal work for 11 years, and who Holloway had described as expensive and entirely without sentiment. Holloway's note accompanying the forwarded message was 3 words. He's filing back. Assem. The war that followed was quiet in the way that wars between people who know each other too well are always quiet, fought in conference rooms and on paper, through surrogates, with the particular controlled brutality of people who understand exactly where the vulnerable points are and are choosing, for now, not to go there directly. Damien wanted joint custody. Serena's position was full physical and legal, with supervised visitation. His attorneys called it punitive. Holloway called it appropriate, given the circumstances. Serena called it the only thing she could live with and didn't explain further because she didn't have to. She was 8 months pregnant now, and she moved through the legal process with a deliberate physical slowness that had nothing to do with her mental state. She sat in Holloway's conference room and read discovery documents and made notes in the margins with a mechanical pencil, and when Holloway would pause and check on her, she would say she was fine in a tone that discouraged further inquiry. It was in one of those discovery sessions, the 4th or 5th, she'd lost track, weeks blurring into weeks, that Serena found the first photograph. It was in a batch of financial records, misfiled, apparently by accident, or perhaps by design, she'd never know. A photograph printed on office paper, taken in what appeared to be a hotel room, date stamped 18 months ago. A woman she didn't recognize. Evidence of the specific kind that requires no interpretation. She set it on the table and sat back and looked at it. Holloway said nothing. She was that kind of lawyer. She knew when the moment needed silence. Serena thought about the year 18 months ago. She thought about where she'd been that October, what she'd believed, the specific texture of her daily life, and the framework she'd used to make sense of it. She'd been happy, she thought, or something that had been performing happiness so successfully she hadn't examined it too closely. How many? She asked. Holloway hesitated for just a moment. We've documented 4 over approximately 6 years. There may be more. The records are... How many? Serena said again. Not a question this time. 6 that we can document. Serena nodded. She picked up her mechanical pencil. Keep going, she said. Cool. The baby came early. Not dangerously early. 37 weeks, which the OB called term enough technically, with the slight hedge that medical professionals deployed when they wanted to be reassuring without overpromising. Serena had been at Claire's apartment making tea when the first contraction hit, and she had stood at the kitchen counter and breathed through it with the methodical calm of someone who had been dreading and preparing for this exact moment in equal measure. 14 hours of labor. Claire held her hand. A nurse named Delphine, who had a grandmother's instinct for the right kind of quiet, stayed close during the hard middle hours. There were no other family members present. Serena had not called Damien. She had thought about it. She was honest enough to admit that. In the brutal mechanical middle of labor, she had thought about his hands, which were large and steady, and about the way he had a capacity for absolute stillness that she had always found grounding. She had thought about all the things he would have been good for in that room, and then she had breathed through another contraction and thought about the photograph on the discovery table, and then she had just focused on the next breath, and then the next. At 3:47 in the morning, Eleanor Russo was born. Serena held her daughter for the first time and felt something happen that she couldn't put language to, not the cinematic overwhelming she'd braced for, but something quieter and more tectonic, a shift in what she understood herself to be capable of. She looked at Eleanor's face, which was ancient and furious and perfect, and she thought, I'm going to be so careful with you. She called Damien at 4:15, not because she wanted to, because he was the father and the child was healthy, and there was a version of herself that she was trying to maintain that required her to make that call. He answered on the first ring, which told her he hadn't slept either. She's here, Serena said. She's healthy. 3 days and you can see her. Supervised visit, same as we discussed with the lawyers. Silence on his end. Then a sound she had never heard from Damien Russo in 7 years of marriage. A sound that might have been him trying to hold himself together and failing, just slightly. What's her name? He asked. Serena looked down at her daughter, who had stopped being furious and was now just looking at her with dark eyes that hadn't decided what color they were going to be. Eleanor, she said. Another silence. Then, thank you for calling. She hung up. She looked at Eleanor. Eleanor looked back. It's just us, Serena said. The baby's expression did not change. She seemed already to be the kind of person who required more information before passing judgment. Serena understood that completely. The first supervised visit happened 10 days after Eleanor came home. Holloway had arranged it through a neutral facility, a family services center in Evanston with soft furniture and a play corner for older children and windows that let in enough light to make the room feel less institutional than it actually was. A court-appointed monitor named Phyllis sat in the corner with a clipboard and the practiced invisibility of someone very good at their job. Serena brought Eleanor in her car seat and sat in a chair against the wall and watched. She had prepared herself for a version of Damien she'd need to guard against. The charming version, the one that had worked on her for years, deployed now for a different audience. She had prepared herself to watch him perform fatherhood the way he performed everything, with the controlled excellence of a man who understood that image was leverage. What she was not prepared for was the way he looked when they put Eleanor in his arms. He sat down first, which she hadn't expected. He sat down like his legs had made the decision without him. And then the monitor placed Eleanor in his arms, and Damien looked at his daughter, and the performance, whatever she'd been bracing for, just wasn't there. His face did something she'd never seen it do. It broke open, not dramatically, not with tears or theatrics, just the careful construction of Damien Russo, which she had watched him maintain for 7 years in every circumstance, simply wasn't adequate for the weight of what was in his hands. He held Eleanor with the focused terror of someone who understood that he was holding something irreplaceable and was not certain he deserved to. Serena watched this for 45 minutes and said nothing. When the visit was over and the monitor was making her notes and Damien was standing by the door with Eleanor's car seat already buckled and ready to go, he looked at Serena across the room. "She has your coloring," he said. It was such a small thing, such a completely ordinary thing to say. And she hated that it landed, hated that she felt anything other than the clean cold of her resolved position, and she picked up the car seat and said, "I know," and walked out. She sat in her car in the parking lot for 6 minutes before she trusted herself to drive. She was 8 weeks out from the divorce being finalized. 8 weeks, a number she kept recalculating the way you count down the days of a sentence, when the first thing happened that she hadn't planned for. She was alone in the new apartment. She'd found it 2 months ago. A 2-bedroom in Wicker Park, on the 3rd floor of a building with a secured entry and good light, and a 2nd bedroom she was slowly making into something that deserved the word home. Eleanor was asleep. Serena was working. She'd gone back to her work as a strategic consultant, the job she'd paused for the marriage and then abandoned for it entirely, and she was rebuilding that practice now, client by client, and it was slow, and it was real, and it was hers. Her laptop was open. She was reading through a proposal when the email came in, not from Damien directly, but from Preston Cole's office, forwarded immediately by Holloway with a note that said simply, "Read this." Serena read it. Then she read it again. Then she sat back in her chair and looked at the ceiling. The Ventura family. A name she knew, she'd heard it enough times in the architecture of Damien's business that she understood its weight, had apparently decided that Damien's domestic upheaval represented an opportunity. The email was a legal notice, but the subtext was the kind that lawyers knew how to write for people who understood how to read subtext. There were individuals who viewed Serena and Eleanor as a vulnerability to be exploited. Holloway's follow-up call came 3 minutes later. "This is a threat," Holloway said without preamble. "I understand that. You need to talk to Damien." Serena was quiet for a long moment. Eleanor made a sound from the bedroom, the particular sleep sound she made around the 2-hour mark, half waking and settling back down. "I know," Serena said. She ended the call and sat in the quiet of her apartment, her life, the thing she had built from what remained after the demolition. And she understood that 8 weeks from the end of one story, something else was beginning, something she had not chosen and could not outrun. And that Damien Russo, who had broken her in the most complete way she had ever been broken, was the only person alive who could help her protect their daughter. She picked up her phone. She stared at his contact for a long time. She pressed call. 3. The phone rang 4 times before he picked up. Serena had counted. She'd been counting things compulsively since the night she walked out of her own house. Minutes on clocks, steps between rooms, the particular number of times she had to remind herself to breathe during depositions. Counting was the mind's way of maintaining grip on something when everything else had gone liquid. "Serena." His voice was wide awake. It was past 11 at night, and Damien Russo sounded like he hadn't slept in days, which maybe he hadn't, but he was wide awake. "I got the Ventura communication," she said. A beat of silence. She could hear him shift, the specific sound of a large man recalibrating himself in a chair. "When?" "An hour ago, through Holloway." Cole shouldn't have routed that through the legal channel. That was... He stopped, started again. "How much did the filing say?" "Enough." She was standing at her kitchen window, looking out at the alley below. A cat was moving along the fence line with the patient confidence of something that understood exactly where it belonged. "Damien, are my daughter and I in danger?" The silence this time was longer. She had learned in 7 years to read his silences the way a meteorologist reads pressure systems. This one was the kind that preceded honesty, the rare kind, the kind he deployed only when the stakes were high enough that performance became counterproductive. "There's a possibility," he said. "The Venturas have been watching the situation. They see the divorce as a leverage point." "Yes." She pressed her forehead against the cold glass of the window. Eleanor was asleep 12 feet away. "What do you need from me?" "Right now? Let me put a detail on the building." "Absolutely not." "Serena, I am not having your people in my building. I am not bringing that world into the life I am building. Figure out another way." His exhale was controlled, but she caught the edge of it, the frustration that he was swallowing rather than deploying. "Then I need you to stay off your regular patterns for the next 2 weeks. Different routes, different schedules. Don't tell anyone where Eleanor's pediatric appointments are." "I already do those things." Another small silence. "I know," he said, and something in his voice shifted to an acknowledgement she hadn't expected from him. "I know you do. I'll handle the Ventura issue on my end. Just," he paused, "call me if anything feels wrong. Anything at all." "Don't misread this call, Damien." "I'm not misreading it." "Good," she said, and hung up. She stood at the window for another 3 minutes. The cat had moved on. The alley was empty and ordinary, and she kept looking at it anyway because something in her nervous system wouldn't accept the evidence of normalcy, kept scanning for the thing that hadn't emerged yet. Then she went to check on Eleanor and stood in the doorway of the small bedroom watching her daughter sleep, and the counting in her head went quiet for a moment, and that was the closest thing to peace she'd felt in months. The divorce was finalized on a Thursday in early March. Serena wore a gray blazer and sat across the table from Damien for the first time since the night in the driveway, and she kept her eyes on the documents in front of her and the pen in her hand, and she did not look at his face. She had made that decision in the elevator on the way up. She would not look at his face today because looking at his face cost her something she was not willing to spend. Holloway sat to her left. Cole sat across with Damien. The judge's representative sat at the head of the table. The room smelled like recycled air and old carpet and the particular arid cleanliness of institutional spaces. The custody arrangement was what Serena had fought for. Full physical and legal custody, primary residence with Serena, supervised visitation twice weekly through the approved Family Services Center with the eventual provision for unsupervised visits pending a 12-month review. Damien had signed it. Cole had pushed back for 6 weeks on the supervised requirement, and then 3 days before the final filing date, Damien had called Cole and told him to drop it. Serena had not known that until Holloway told her the morning of the finalization. She didn't know what to do with that information, so she set it aside with the other things she was setting aside. When the last signature was witnessed and the representative had gathered the documents, everyone stood with the muted efficiency of people who understood that there was no ceremony appropriate for the occasion. Coats were collected. Briefcases were closed. She was almost to the door when Damien said her name. She stopped. She turned because not turning would have been a kind of performance she didn't respect in herself. He was standing by the table, his coat not yet on, and she let herself look, briefly. He looked like someone who had not been sleeping in weeks and had stopped hiding it. The precision of his appearance, the thing she had always privately admired, was slightly off register, not dramatically, enough for her to see. "I'm sorry," he said. Not the orchestrated version she'd been bracing for, not the speech. Just those 2 words in a room where the lawyers were pretending to study their phones. I know what it's worth right now. I just need you to have heard it." Serena looked at him. She let the words sit in the room without immediately dismantling them or receiving them. "Holloway will reach out to Cole about the spring visitation schedule," she said. She walked out. In the elevator on the way down, she pressed the button for the lobby and stood with her back straight and her hands still, and she did not let herself feel anything until she was in the car with the door closed. Then she put her head back against the headrest and exhaled for a very long time. She found the records by accident. Or not entirely by accident. She had been back to the estate once since moving out, once with Holloway, to retrieve tax documents from Damien's home office that were relevant to the financial disclosure process. Damien had not been present for the retrieval. He'd sent Cole, who'd stood in the hallway with the polished discomfort of a man who found the domestic realm genuinely foreign. She'd gone to the office to find the files and found them in the second drawer of the cabinet along the east wall, where they'd always been because she knew this office better than anyone imagined she did. She spent 3 years watching Damien use it. She knew which drawer he considered important and which he considered operational, and she knew the difference between the files he labeled and the files he didn't. The unlabeled files were in the bottom drawer. She had told herself she was not going to open them. She had been very clear with herself about that while Holloway confirmed the tax documents, and Cole murmured something into his phone in the hallway. She opened them. The first thing she found was a hotel receipt from 2 years ago. She recognized the property. She'd stayed there once herself, with Damien, a weekend in New York for a gallery opening he had no interest in, but had attended because she wanted to go. The name on the room wasn't his, but the corporate card number was. She stood in the office and she looked at that receipt for a long time. She was aware that she was past the point where this information could hurt her in the primary way it might have hurt her before. The divorce was finalized, the life was over, the accounting was done. But there was a secondary hurt, quieter and more corrosive, that she had not anticipated. The particular pain of discovering that the timeline of betrayal was even longer than she'd thought. That the reconstruction she'd been doing in her head, before that, we were real. Before that, it was true. She had to be pushed back again. And then back again. Until she wasn't sure what bedrock she was looking for or if it existed. She put the receipt in her bag. She closed the drawer. She walked out of the office and past Cole without looking at him, and she said to Holloway, "We're done here." And Holloway, who was that kind of woman, just said yes and followed. In the car, Holloway said carefully, "Did you find something else?" 6 years, Serena said. That was what the bank records in the drawer taken in aggregate seemed to suggest. 6 years of parallel life, running concurrent with the one she'd inhabited. The documentation your team found, the 4 women, it goes back further. Holloway was quiet. "I just need to know what I'm actually accounting for," Serena said. Her voice was level. She had trained it to be level. "That's all?" "I understand." She looked out the window at the city moving past. "I want to see everything, whatever the discovery process turned up, whatever your investigators have, all of it." "Serena, that material is all of it," she said again. She sat with it for a weekend. Claire tried to come over on Saturday, and Serena told her she needed the time. Eleanor was with the court-approved sitter, a young woman named Petra, who had been background checked to a degree that Serena acknowledged was probably excessive and didn't apologize for. The apartment was quiet. Serena laid the documents out on her kitchen table, and she went through them with the same mechanical precision she applied to client analysis, moving through the evidence of 6 years of her husband's betrayal with a thoroughness that left her, by Sunday afternoon, simply exhausted. Not destroyed, not dissolved. Just profoundly, physically exhausted. The kind of tired that settles into the back of the skull and the hinges of the jaw. What she found was not a man who had been reckless or impulsive. What she found was a man who had been systematic about it. The same pattern repeated. 3 to 4 months, the same type of woman, then a clean ending and a gap of a few weeks, then another beginning. It had run like a business operation. Of course it had. Damien Russo did not do anything without system. She thought about the version of herself that had lived inside that marriage, the Serena who had accepted the operational distances as necessary features of being with a man in his position, who had told herself that the textural strangeness of her life was just the texture of the life she'd chosen. She thought about what that woman had deserved instead. She thought about it clearly, and with full grief, which was the first time she'd let herself grieve it that honestly. Then she gathered the documents, and she put them in a fireproof box in the hall closet, and she called Petra and asked her to bring Eleanor home. Eleanor was 4 months old now and had developed opinions. She had an opinion about hunger and an opinion about being held facing outward so she could survey the world, and an opinion about the particular white noise recording Serena had found that made her stop fussing in the middle of the night. She had not as yet expressed any particular opinion about her father. Serena sat on the floor with Eleanor on her playmat and watched her daughter navigate the discovery of her own hands and thought, whatever he was to me, that is separate from whatever he can be to her. She had decided that early, and she meant it, and some days it was easier to mean than others. Today it was hard. She meant it anyway. The supervised visits continued. Wednesdays and Saturdays, 2 hours each, at the Family Services Center in Evanston with Phyllis and the clipboard. Serena began, against her better instincts, against the specific advice of her own interior counsel, to pay attention during those visits in ways she hadn't permitted herself at first. She had originally sat in the corner with her phone out, maintaining the appearance of distraction. She had told herself that was strategic. Don't give him an audience, don't perform reactions that could be documented by the monitor and used in the 12-month review. But somewhere in the 6th or 7th visit, she had looked up from her phone and found herself simply watching. He was good with Eleanor. That was the fact she had to accommodate. Not performatively good, not the curated excellence of a man playing a role, but genuinely attentive in the particular way of someone who had discovered something that mattered to him in a way that surprised even himself. He talked to Eleanor constantly during the visits, not the cooing nonsense she might have expected, but actual sentences about the light coming through the window or the sound outside or whatever she seemed to be looking at. He tracked her gaze. He noticed what caught her attention and followed it rather than redirecting her. He was patient in a way she had never seen Damien Russo be patient about anything. In the 9th visit, Eleanor laughed for the first time. A real laugh. Not the reflexive gas bubble smile of the early weeks, but an actual response to stimulus, to Damien making a specific face that Serena would not have predicted would produce laughter, and which did, absolutely did, produced it. The sound was so complete that it knocked the breath out of Serena for a full second. Damien looked up from Eleanor and found Serena's eyes across the room, and his face was open, was the only word for it, open in a way she had not seen it, the same way it had broken open at the first visit, but with something added now, something that might have been gratitude, or might have been grief, or might have been both things at the same register. She looked back down at her phone. Her chest felt like something was pressing on it from the inside. Wong. It was Phyllis who said it, on a Wednesday in late April, while Serena was signing out at the front desk. Phyllis was 60-something, with the economical bearing of a woman who had spent 20 years watching families in extremis and had developed a profound investment in saying only what was necessary. She did not editorialize. She did not offer comfort that wasn't asked for. In the weeks of these visits, she and Serena had exchanged perhaps 40 words total, all of them procedural. She said quietly, while Serena was still looking down at the sign-out sheet, "That man is trying to deserve something." Serena looked up. Phyllis's face was neutral, clipboard in hand, the practiced inscrutability of her profession in place. But her eyes said she meant it. Serena didn't answer. She finished signing out. She got Eleanor into her car seat and drove home in the last of the winter light, with her jaw tight and her hands steady on the wheel, and the memory of Eleanor's laugh running on a loop she could not turn off. The call came at 6 in the morning on a Thursday in early May. Not Damien. An unknown number with a Chicago prefix that she almost didn't answer, that she answered because Eleanor was already awake and she was already awake, and some premonition she couldn't have articulated made her thumb the green button. The voice was male, low, with a cadence she didn't recognize. Mrs. Russo, it said, and the use of that name, the name she had filed paperwork to leave behind, made every nerve in her body align. Who is this? Someone who thinks you deserve to know that the Ventura family's interest in your situation has moved from theoretical to operational. You have approximately 48 hours before they make a decision about how to use you. The line went dead. She stood in her kitchen with Eleanor on her hip and the phone in her other hand, and she felt the apartment's ordinary morning light, the kitchen light, the smell of coffee she hadn't finished making, take on the particular unreality of a thing that could no longer protect her. She called Damien. It rang once. "I heard," he said, which meant he'd gotten his own version of this call, or something like it. "Serena, I need you to listen to me very carefully right now. Don't tell me this is manageable," she said. "I'm not going to tell you that." His voice was different than she'd heard it in months, stripped of the careful register he'd been maintaining around her, back to something rawer and more operational. I need you and Eleanor to be somewhere else within the next 6 hours. Not Claire's. Not anywhere on your regular map. I have a place. It's secure. I need you to trust me on this." Serena looked at Eleanor, who was studying the pattern on her mother's shirt with the focused attention she brought to everything. Eleanor did not know what the Ventura family was. Eleanor did not know what any of this was. "If I do this," Serena said, "it is not reconciliation. It is not a signal of anything except that I will do what my daughter's safety requires. I understand that. And I need to be in control of the communication. If I want to leave, we leave." "Agreed." She closed her eyes for a half-second. She opened them. Eleanor had shifted her attention from the shirt to Serena's face and was looking at her with that same preternatural assessment she'd been doing since the delivery room. The expression that seemed to be gathering data, forming conclusions. "Send me the address," Serena said. "We'll be ready in 2 hours." She hung up and started moving through the apartment with a speed and efficiency that her body knew and her mind recognized as the specific mode she'd been in before. The mode she'd been in the night she walked out of her own house. The mode that meant the situation had clarified past a certain threshold, and all that remained was execution. She had the bag packed and Eleanor fed, and the car seat locked into the car in 90 minutes. She was moving down the building's back staircase, not the elevator, not anymore, when her phone buzzed with a text from a number she didn't have saved but recognized from the prefix as one of Damien's security contacts. The text was an address. Below the address, a single additional line. 2 Ventura men outside your building, east side, Black Tahoe. She stopped on the staircase landing. The door at the bottom led to the alley. The alley ran north, away from the east side. She looked at Eleanor in the car seat, at her daughter's calm and watchful face, and she felt something crystallize in her chest that was colder and more absolute than anything she'd felt since the night she'd walked out of the master bedroom and down the stairs, and sat on that bottom step counting minutes on a dead man's clock. She pushed through the alley door, and she did not look back. The alley smelled like wet asphalt and something rotting 2 dumpsters down, and Serena moved through it with Eleanor's car seat in one hand and her bag cutting into her shoulder and her eyes forward, always forward, the way you move when you understand that looking back is a luxury you have temporarily suspended. The car was at the alley's north exit. She'd parked it there deliberately, not because she'd known this specific moment was coming, but because she had been raised by a woman who taught her that you always know where your car is and you always park facing out. Small disciplines, the kind that don't feel like survival training until survival is what's required. She got Eleanor buckled. She got behind the wheel. She did not start the engine for 30 seconds, just sat with her hands on the wheel and ran through the address Damien had sent. A property she didn't recognize, an outer suburb she knew only as a geography on the northwest edge of the city's sprawl. 40 minutes in ordinary traffic. She was going to assume this was not ordinary traffic and plan for longer. She started the engine and pulled north through the alley and did not look toward the east side of the building as she turned onto the street. Her phone said Damien was calling. She put it on speaker on the dash. "I'm moving," she said before he could speak. "I know. My guy has eyes on you. Stay on Damon until I tell you to turn." "You have eyes on me right now." "I have eyes on everything right now. Serena." A pause. Something operational happening on his end. She could hear the specific background texture of men moving, doors, someone's voice at a distance. The Tahoe didn't follow. They stayed at the building. "They're watching to see if I come back." "Yes." "What does that mean for the timetable?" "It means we have a window. Drive." She drove. He stayed on the line, saying little, issuing 2 or 3 turn-by-turn adjustments in a voice stripped entirely of the careful register he'd been maintaining around her for months. This was a different Damien, not the man from the conference rooms or the family services center, not the man choosing his words with the awareness of how they'd be received. This was the operational version. She had heard it before, in fragments, in phone calls she was only ever supposed to hear one side of. She had always found it alarming in the way that competence at violence is alarming when you're close enough to feel its heat. Eleanor slept. The city moved past the windows. Serena drove. Bam. The property was a house in Barrington Hills, a low, broad structure on 2 acres set back from the road behind a tree line that made it effectively invisible from the street. Not ostentatious, the opposite of the North Shore estate. This was a house that did not want to be noticed, and the careful anonymity of it told her more about how Damien's organization actually worked than most of the discovery documents had. A man she didn't recognize was waiting at the end of the driveway. He stepped aside as she pulled in and didn't speak, just directed her with a hand gesture toward the detached garage at the side of the house. She pulled in. The garage door came down behind her. Damien was inside. Not in the garage. The door from the garage to the house opened and he was there, in a jacket she'd seen before from some other context her memory couldn't immediately place. And he looked. She let herself assess him quickly and clinically, the way she'd been training herself to look at him since the finalization. He looked like someone running on adrenaline and something else, something older, the specific fuel of a man who has identified a threat to something that matters to him and has been awake for however long it takes to address it. He looked at Eleanor first. That was what she noticed. Before he spoke, before he addressed the logistical situation, his eyes went to Eleanor in the car seat, and the inventory he ran was brief but complete. The quick scan of a person confirming that what they needed to be intact was intact. "She sleep the whole way?" he asked. "Most of it." Serena lifted the car seat out of the car. "Talk to me about the Venturas." Inside. The house was clean and sparse and clearly maintained without being lived in regularly. Surfaces clear, refrigerator stocked with the particular efficiency of someone who had anticipated a stay of indeterminate length. Serena put Eleanor's car seat on the kitchen table and checked her daughter's face. Still sleeping, the deep, inaccessible sleep of infants who have not yet learned to be anxious. And then she turned to Damien. "Talk," she said. He put both hands flat on the kitchen counter and looked at her across the width of the room. The space between them was approximately 10 feet and felt, as it had felt for months in various rooms, like something more topological than physical. "The Ventura family has been looking for an advantage over me for 8 months," he said. "Since Marco Ventura's nephew got arrested in November on charges that came from information originally traced to my organization. Marco doesn't have confirmation of that. He has a strong working theory. Is the theory correct?" A beat. "Yes." "So the targeting of Eleanor and me is retaliation. It's leverage. They're not planning to hurt you. They want to take you, both of you, and use you as a negotiating position to get information about 3 federal cases that have components related to Ventura operations." Serena was quiet for a moment. The refrigerator hummed. Eleanor's chest rose and fell. "And if you don't give them what they want?" Damien's jaw moved. "I will give them what they want before it gets to that." "No," she said immediately. "No, you won't. Whatever that means for federal cases involving your people, whatever that means for the legal exposure, you're not doing that." "Serena, I am not going to be the instrument of you destroying people who trusted you. I am not going to have that be the story of how my daughter's life was protected." Her voice was level. She could feel the place in her chest where the level voice was costing her, the place where the pressure was building that she was going to have to address later, in private. "We find another way." He looked at her for a long time. Something worked through his face that she didn't try to interpret. "Okay," he said. "Okay. We find another way." "How long do we need to be here?" "Until I've neutralized the immediate threat." 3 days? Maybe 4. 3 days in this house, in this proximity. She had not been in a room alone with Damien Russo for more than 40 minutes since the night in the driveway. She noted this fact and filed it without commentary. "I need a setup for Eleanor, sleeping space, a surface for her things. Second bedroom on the left, I had Petra's list." He said it simply, without calculation, and she understood that he had thought about what Eleanor needed before he'd thought about what the situation required of him. And she noted that too, filed it in the same place she was putting everything that required eventual accounting. She picked up Eleanor's car seat and went to find the room. The first day passed in the particular suspended tension of 2 people observing a truce they haven't formally declared. Serena worked. She had her laptop and enough of her client materials to maintain the appearance of a functioning practice, and she sat at the kitchen table during Eleanor's morning nap and moved through her work with the focused efficiency of someone using purpose as a counterweight to circumstances. Damien took calls in the back bedroom, door mostly closed, speaking in the low register she'd learned not to track too closely because the details she caught were details she'd spent energy trying to forget. In the afternoon, he took Eleanor for a walk around the property's perimeter, while Serena stayed inside and allowed herself 20 minutes of sitting absolutely still with her eyes closed and her hands in her lap. Not meditating, just being still. She had learned to do this during the pregnancy, and it was one of the few practices that actually quieted the arithmetic. Her mind ran constantly. She heard them come back in, heard Damien's voice through the door, the specific tone he used with Eleanor, that unhurried conversational address that still caught her off guard by existing at all in the man she thought she'd known completely. She heard Eleanor produce a sound that was not quite a word and not quite anything else, but was emphatically communicative. She kept her eyes closed for another 2 minutes. It was on the second night that she found him in the kitchen at past midnight, sitting at the table with a glass of water he wasn't drinking, and he looked up when she came in and neither of them pretended the other wasn't there. She poured herself water from the pitcher in the refrigerator and sat down across the table from him. Not close, the table was long enough that there was still a full adult wingspan of space between them. And they sat in the kitchen in the rural quiet of the Barrington Hills property, nothing outside but darkened trees and the occasional sound of something moving through the underbrush. "I've been in therapy," he said. She looked at him. "Since January, 3 times a week." He turned the glass of water a quarter rotation on the table. "I'm not telling you that to ask for credit. I'm telling you because you deserve to know what I'm actually doing with the wreckage." "What does the therapist say about it?" The question seemed to surprise him, that she'd gone there directly, that she'd asked for the substance rather than the fact. "She says I've been performing who I was supposed to be since I was 9 years old, that I never actually decided what I wanted. I just executed what was modeled." "Victor," Serena said. "Yeah." He looked at the water glass. Victor. She thought about Damien's father, the brutal old man with the appraising eyes who had never looked at her like she was permanent, who had shaken Damien's hand at their wedding like it was a business confirmation, who had built, from what Damien had told her in fragments over the years, a very specific architecture of manhood that made tenderness something to be concealed and women something to be managed. "That explains it," she said carefully. "It doesn't excuse it." "I know that." He looked up from the glass. "I'm not offering it as an excuse. I'm offering it as the truth I'm currently sitting inside of, trying to figure out if I can build something different out of the same material." The kitchen was quiet. The refrigerator cycled on. "Can you?" she said. "I don't know yet," he said. "That's the most honest answer I have." She sat with that. She had expected him, in some version of this conversation, to be more certain, to perform certainty the way he performed everything, the well-executed reassurance. The absence of it did something to the room that she hadn't anticipated. "Get some sleep," she said, and stood up, and went back to the room where Eleanor was sleeping with the small animal intensity of her particular unconsciousness. She lay in the dark for a long time. The call came on the morning of the 3rd day, and it was not the call Damien had been waiting for. She knew immediately from the way he came out of the back bedroom, door opening fast, coat already on, something in his face that she had never seen there before. Not fear. She didn't think Damien Russo was physiologically capable of the standard experience of fear, but its functional equivalent, a rapid internal recalibration, the eyes moving through the room with a speed and deliberateness that wasn't ordinary alertness. "We have a problem," he said. "How bad?" "The man I had watching the east side of your building." He stopped, corrected himself. "He's been working for me for 9 years. He's been feeding information to the Venturas for the last 3 months." The word for what she felt wasn't shock. It was something more specific. The particular vertigo of discovering that the geometry you've been using to navigate a space is wrong in a foundational way. If the man watching her building had been compromised, then the Venturas had known about the safe house before she arrived. The 48-hour window, the early morning call, the black Tahoe parked outside her building. None of it was the shape she had understood it to be. "They know we're here," she said. "They've known since you arrived." His voice was very controlled. The specific control of someone managing something that wants to become rage. I found out 20 minutes ago. My security lead ran an audit overnight on communication patterns and Damien, she cut through it. What is the immediate threat level? They haven't moved yet. My working theory is they want to wait until I'm isolated from my security structure before they... He stopped. His jaw tightened. We need to leave. Now. Different location, uncompromised, and I need to identify how deep this goes before I can guarantee anything. How deep does it go? He looked at her. I don't know yet. The words landed in the room with a weight that the walls of the ordinary kitchen were not adequate to contain. Serena had been operating since that first phone call on the assumption that Damien's world was a threat she was adjacent to, something outside the house pressing in. The revelation of the informant, 9 years, and Damien hadn't known, hadn't detected it, meant that the threat had been inside the perimeter the entire time. It meant that the apparatus she was depending on to protect her daughter had a cavity in it she couldn't measure. Who else knew the address of this property? She said. 6 people. He said it and she could see him running the names simultaneously, sorting, assessing. One of them is Marcus. Marcus Webb. She knew the name. She'd never met him. He existed in the category of Damien's operations that she'd always understood she was not supposed to know about, but she'd heard it enough times in enough contexts that she understood Marcus Webb was not a peripheral person. He was one of the structural members. He had been with Damien, from what she'd gathered, since before the organization was what it currently was. You think it's Marcus, she said. I think I don't know. He said it very quietly. And 9 months ago, I would have told you Marcus Webb was the last person on this earth I would suspect of anything, which is exactly what you say about the person who's been inside your operation for 3 months, feeding your enemies information about your movements and your family. Eleanor woke up in the back bedroom and made her particular waking sound, the escalating sequence from murmur to declaration that Serena had learned to interpret as a 5-minute window before genuine distress. She moved automatically toward the sound, and Damien moved aside to let her pass, and in the hallway she stopped and turned back. How long do we have before they decide to move? Hours, not days. Get your car to the back of the property. I'll get Eleanor ready. She went to get her daughter, and she kept her hands steady and her movements efficient, and she did not let herself sit with what she was feeling until she was in the small bedroom with the door half closed, lifting Eleanor out of the travel crib, pressing her daughter's warm, solid weight against her chest, and feeling Eleanor's fingers curl against her collarbone with the automatic trust of something that has not yet learned that trust is a calculation. I've got you, she said, into Eleanor's hair. She said it as a simple, factual statement, an accounting of what was true. She meant it as both. Then, they were 20 minutes from the Barrington Hills property when Damien's phone rang, and she knew from the way he looked at the screen that it was the call he'd been dreading. He answered it on speaker. A voice she didn't recognize, male, unhurried, with a deliberateness that was more threatening than volume would have been. Damien, I think you know why I'm calling. Marco Ventura. She identified the name without Damien having to say it, the way you identify something you've been told to fear without ever having encountered it directly. Marco, Damien said. He drove. His hands were even on the wheel. You've been difficult to pin down. I appreciate a man who's careful, but I think we've reached a point where careful has become counterproductive for both of us. Say what you want to say. I want the Kellerman files, the ledgers your organization has on the distribution network my nephew's case is currently connected to. You give me those, and your family enjoys a long and entirely peaceful life. The car was very quiet. Eleanor was in the back seat. Serena sat with her hands in her lap and her eyes forward, and she did not look at Damien. And if I don't, Damien said, then we have a conversation about what the Whitmore woman and the baby are worth to your decision-making process. The voice was calm. I think we both know the answer to that. Damien ended the call. Serena said, the Kellerman files. Federal evidence. His voice was very flat. Names of 6 individuals who've been cooperating with a DOJ investigation into the Ventura family's distribution chain. If Marco gets those names, Those people die. Yes. She looked at the road ahead. The highway stretched into the northwest gray of a May morning, flat and ordinary and traversable. She thought about 6 people who had made the calculation that cooperating with the federal government was survivable and were currently alive because that calculation had held. There has to be a way to end this that doesn't require you to make that choice, she said. I'm working on it. Work faster. Serena. The files don't leave your hands, she said. I need you to hear me say that clearly. Whatever else happens, those files do not go to Marco Ventura. He looked at her then, a brief sidelong look that lasted long enough for her to see what was in it. Something that might have been relief, or recognition, or the specific look of a man who has been carrying something alone and has just been told, unexpectedly, that the carrying will be shared. I know what I'm not going to do, he said. I need to figure out what I'm going to do instead. Her phone buzzed. She looked at the screen. An unknown number, different prefix from the morning call, and something in her intuition, the same intuition that had made her answer the first unknown call, the one that had started all of this, made her pick it up. Ms. Whitmore. A woman's voice, professional, measured. My name is Agent Dana Reyes. I'm with the FBI's Organized Crime Division. I think it's time we talked about Damian Russo's organization and about the Ventura family, and about a very specific set of files that both sides want very badly. Serena looked at the phone in her hand. She looked at Damian, who had heard the voice on speaker and whose face had gone absolutely still. The stillness she'd once found grounding and now read as something more complicated. A man confronting the moment when the walls of the life he'd constructed have become too thin to hold what's outside them. She looked back at the road. I'm listening, she said. Agent Dana Reyes wanted to meet in person. Serena said no. Not because she didn't understand the FBI's preference for controlled environments and face-to-face dynamics. She understood it precisely, which was why she declined. She was in a moving vehicle with her infant daughter and a man whose phone had just been triangulated by a federal agent who claimed to have been watching his organization, and the last thing she was going to do was drive to a location of someone else's choosing. We can talk on this line, she told Reyes. For now. A brief pause from the agent, calculating. All right. How long have you been watching? 14 months. Serena looked at Damian. His hands were still even on the wheel, but she could see the tension in his forearms. The muscles pulled taut under the jacket sleeve, the specific isometric grip of a man holding himself very still. And Marcus Webb? Serena said. Another pause. Longer. What about him? Is he yours? The silence that followed lasted 4 seconds. She counted. Ms. Whitmore, I'd encourage you not to. Is Marcus Webb a federal informant? Damian's hands came off the wheel for a half second. Not a loss of control. A physical reaction. Involuntary. The body registering something the mind hadn't finished processing. He recovered immediately, both hands back, eyes on the road. Reyes said, That's a conversation that needs to happen in person. Then I'll take that as confirmation, Serena said. We'll call you back within the hour. She ended the call. The car was very quiet. Eleanor made a small sound in the back seat. Not distress, just the ambient narration she'd been providing since they left the property. The running commentary of someone new to the world who finds all of it worth noting. Normally, Serena found it steadying. Right now, it was the only sound in the car, and it was the sound of everything that was at stake, and it was almost too much to hold. Damian said nothing for a full mile. The highway moved under them. A truck passed in the left lane, a mundane roar and a wash of displaced air, and then they were in the ordinary quiet again. 9 years, he said finally. Not a question, not directed at her, just the number released into the car because it needed somewhere to go. Marcus came to me when I was 26 years old, he said. His voice was stripped of everything except the words themselves. My father had just given me operational control of the North Side accounts. I didn't know what I was doing. I knew how to follow instruction, and I knew how to be hard when hardness was required, but I didn't know how to run something. Marcus showed me. He paused. He was the person who explained to me that you could run this kind of organization with something resembling a code, that you didn't have to be Victor. Another pause. I trusted him more than I've trusted anyone. Serena said, he may have saved your life more than once while building a case against you. I know. Both things can be true. I know that too. He exhaled through his nose, controlled. It doesn't help right now. No, she said. It doesn't. She looked out the window at the flat Illinois landscape, the exit signs and the commercial corridors, and the particular Midwestern endlessness of a highway moving through a state that doesn't believe in topographical drama. She thought about what she knew and what she needed to know and what needed to happen in the next several hours for her daughter to be safe beyond the temporary safe she currently was. Call Reyes back, she said. Tell her we'll meet, but we choose the location. They chose a diner in Palatine, 40 minutes north, the kind of place with laminate tables and a coffee urn that had been running since the morning shift, and a parking lot visible from every interior seat. Serena had picked it from a map, not a place she'd been, not a place on any pattern anyone could have predicted, with 2 exits and a strip mall next door that provided secondary egress if necessary. Damien parked facing out. Serena got Eleanor into the carrier against her chest, the forward-facing position Eleanor preferred, and they went inside. Reyes was already there, 40-something, Hispanic, in civilian clothes that were too practically assembled to be accidental. Jacket with pockets, no jewelry, shoes that moved well. She was alone, which either meant she trusted the situation or was performing trust as a tactic, and Serena filed both possibilities without resolving them. Reyes looked at Eleanor first, the same inventory Damien had run at the safe house, the quick confirmation scan, and then at Serena, and then at Damien, and the assessment she ran on Damien was different in character, longer, the look of someone who has spent 14 months building a picture of a person from surveillance and documents and is now reconciling that picture with the physical presence. They sat. Coffee appeared from a waitress who had the professional incuriosity of someone who had seen many kinds of people conduct many kinds of business in this booth. Marcus Webb has been cooperating with our investigation for 11 months, Reyes said without preamble, the same directness Serena had heard on the phone. He came to us voluntarily. He provided documentation on 23 operations, including 3 that directly intersect with the Ventura family's distribution network. He's our primary source on the Kellerman case. Damien sat across from her. He had not touched his coffee. What does he get? Immunity, relocation, his family. His family. Something moved through Damien's face. He has a daughter in college. I know. You know, he said, very flat. Mr. Russo. Reyes leaned forward slightly. I'm not here to debate the architecture of what Marcus did or why. I'm here because the Ventura family has made a move that creates a specific problem for this investigation and a specific threat to people in this room who are not part of our case. Her eyes moved to Eleanor, briefly. Marco Ventura needs those files to dismantle the Kellerman prosecution. If he gets them, 3 years of federal work and 6 protected witnesses lose their protection. If he acquires leverage over you to get them, she left it there. Then we have a mutual interest, Serena said. Reyes looked at her. The look was quick and complete, and Serena recognized it as the look of someone recalibrating, adjusting whatever model they'd built of her based on new data. Yes. What do you need from him? Reyes glanced at Damien. A controlled meeting with Marco Ventura. Wired. We need him to attempt to solicit the Kellerman files on record. That gives us the extortion charge, the conspiracy charge, and enough to move on the Ventura family's operation independently of anything related to your, she paused, a precise pause, your husband's case. Former husband, Serena said. Former husband's case, Reyes said, without missing a beat. Damien said, and what happens to my case? The question sat on the table between them. Reyes looked at him for a moment with an expression that was professionally neutral, and underneath the neutral was something she hadn't entirely managed to contain. Not sympathy, exactly, but the acknowledgement that the question deserved a real answer rather than a managed one. That's a separate conversation, she said. With my supervisor and the U.S. Attorney's Office. I can't make you promises I'm not authorized to make. What I can tell you is that cooperation in neutralizing the Ventura threat would be a significant factor in how that conversation goes. Damien looked at the coffee cup he hadn't touched. Then he looked up. Set up the meeting. But the meeting with Marco Ventura happened 48 hours later. Serena was not supposed to be there. That was very clear, the one condition Reyes had stated without flexibility. Serena and Eleanor went to a secondary location with 2 federal agents, and they stayed there. No proximity to the operation, no variables that weren't necessary. Serena had agreed. She had meant it when she said it. She kept Eleanor with the agents at the secondary location, a federal safe house in Schaumburg, utilitarian and secure. And she stayed there for 4 hours, working at the kitchen table, until her phone showed a text from a number Reyes had given her for updates. Meeting confirmed. 9 p.m., Wicker Park location. Then, an hour later, Russo en route, technical team in position. She sat at the kitchen table and she looked at her laptop screen without reading it. Eleanor was asleep in the back room. The 2 agents, a young man who introduced himself as Torres, and a woman in her mid-30s named Chen, who had the specific quality of calm Serena associated with people who had been in genuinely dangerous situations and had decided how they felt about their own mortality, moved through the safe house with the same practiced invisibility as Phyllis from the Family Services Center. At 8:47, her phone rang. Damien. She answered it. I need you to hear something, he said. Traffic sounds in the background, a car moving. Before this happens. Damien, 30 seconds, please. She was quiet. When you walked out of that house, he said, I want you to know that I knew. In the moment I found out you'd been there and seen, I knew exactly what I'd done. Not to us, to you specifically, to the person you'd been trusting me with for 7 years. His voice was controlled in the way that something very close to breaking sounds controlled. I'm not asking for anything. I just need you to have heard that. She sat at the table. Eleanor's monitor showed her daughter's chest rising and falling in the back bedroom. Come back safe, she said. A pause. Then, yeah. He hung up. She sat with the phone in her hand and did not let herself analyze what she was feeling because there was no productive outcome to that analysis in the current moment, and she had learned that one of the few disciplines that actually worked for her was the deferral of emotional accounting to moments when the accounting wouldn't cost her something she needed for something else. She needed to be functional. She would feel things later. The meeting went wrong at 9:23. She knew because Torres's radio produced a burst of compressed communication at that time, code she couldn't parse but that made him straighten and put his hand on the device at his hip. And Chen appeared from the hallway with her own radio, and they exchanged 4 words she couldn't hear, and then Chen came to her. There's been a complication, Chen said. The Ventura team brought additional personnel that we didn't anticipate. The technical team is maintaining position, but Mr. Russo... She stopped. Started again. He's been made. Made how? Ventura's people swept him for wire. They found the device. The kitchen chair was under her and she was aware of it as a physical fact. The solid, ordinary resistance of furniture. The thing she was pressing her weight into while the room did something it didn't actually do. She knew it didn't do it. But that felt, for a moment, like a tilt. Where is he now? Inside the building. The technical team has visual. He's not in immediate physical danger, but the extraction window. Chen's radio burst again. She listened. Her face stayed controlled, but something shifted in the professional neutral of it. Ventura's making a direct threat. He's telling Russo that if the federal operation doesn't stand down within the hour, he'll make a different set of choices about leverage. Eleanor. Yes. Serena stood up. The physical act of standing was deliberate. She needed to be upright, needed the blood to move, needed the vertigo to clear. What's the FBI's position? Reyes is negotiating directly with her supervisor about authorizing a tactical response. The issue is that moving now creates risks for the civilians inside the... Damien is the only civilian inside that building, Serena said. Yes. Then the risk is Damien, Chen said carefully. Ms. Whitmore, I understand what I said. I'm asking what the FBI's assessment is of the risk to him if they move tactically in the next 30 minutes. Chen hesitated. The hesitation was itself an answer. Then we have to give Reyes something to work with, Serena said. Something that changes the calculation for Marco Ventura before he makes a decision that can't be unmade. Chen looked at her. Torres had moved to the far end of the kitchen and was on the radio, voice too low to hear. The safe house was its ordinary utilitarian self. Drop ceiling, linoleum, the hum of a refrigerator that was too large for the space. What are you thinking? Chen said. Serena picked up her phone. The Kellerman files, she said. Damien doesn't have them. Marcus Webb has them, or the FBI has copies through Marcus. But Marco Ventura doesn't know the chain of custody. He knows Damien's organization had them. He doesn't know about Marcus. Chen's eyes moved. Following. If Marco Ventura believes the files can be delivered, Serena said, he doesn't move on Damien while he thinks the delivery is in progress. That buys the tactical team time to position, and it gives Reyes the active extortion solicitation on record she needs. Except now it's compounded by the explicit threat, which is a federal. Stop, Chen said. She said it not unkindly, but with the firmness of someone who needed her to stop before she said the next thing out loud in a way that became actionable. I need to get Reyes on the line. Get Reyes on the line, Serena said. Chen was on her radio in 30 seconds. Serena moved to the doorway of the back bedroom and looked at Eleanor, who was asleep in the portable crib the FBI had sourced, a perfectly ordinary piece of baby equipment in a room that was the farthest thing from ordinary. And she looked at her daughter's sleeping face and felt the specific compound of fear and love that she had discovered was not a combination that weakened either constituent. Both things at full strength, running together, and the combination was not weakness. It was the most awake she had ever been. Her phone buzzed. Damien's location tracker, she had it from the drive, had not turned it off. He was still at the Wicker Park location, not moving. Reyes came on the phone. Chen extended to her. No greeting. Walk me through it. Serena walked her through it. Reyes was quiet for 7 seconds at the end. Serena counted. The risk is that Ventura calls it immediately, Reyes said. If he doesn't believe the delivery is genuine, he'll believe it if the communication comes from me, Serena said. He wants the files to protect his family's operation. I was Damien's wife. I have access to things his wife would plausibly have access to. If I tell Marco Ventura that I will trade him the location of those files in exchange for Damien walking out of that building, he will believe it's real because it's the kind of desperate move a mother makes. It is a desperate move, Reyes said. Yes. If it goes wrong, you have a federal agent on the line and a tactical team outside the building, and the conversation is already recorded, Serena said. Nothing I tell him is true. I'm not actually delivering anything. I'm buying you 20 minutes. Another silence. The refrigerator hummed. Don't say anything that constitutes an actual commitment to evidence tampering, Reyes said. Stay in the territory of implication. I know what I'm doing. Ms. Whitmore. A beat. I need to hear you say you understand the personal risk you're... I understand it, Serena said. Give me the number. Basunk. Marco Ventura answered on the second ring. He had a voice she could now put a face to from the FBI briefing materials Reyes had emailed in the last 20 minutes. 63, silver-haired, the photograph showing a man who had dressed like a businessman for so long the costume had become the person. He had a voice that matched, measured, accented in a way that suggested the accent was being maintained rather than naturally produced, the deliberate retention of heritage as an authority signal. Ms. Whitmore, he said, like he'd been expecting her. Maybe he had. Mr. Ventura. She was standing at the kitchen counter. Chen was beside her. Torres was at the window. The monitor showed Eleanor's breathing. I think we can resolve this without anyone making choices they can't take back. I'm listening. You want the Kellerman files. I know where they are. She kept her voice level. Not artificially calm, just level. The tone of a woman making a transactional proposal. You have something I need intact. I think you understand the math. A pause. She could hear him assessing the specific quality of silence that is an intelligence operating at full capacity. You'd do that, he said. For him. I do it for the baby in the next room, she said. He's the vehicle. I'm a practical person, Mr. Ventura. I want my daughter to have a father who's breathing. Where are the files? He walks out first. Then I tell you where to look. It's the only arrangement I'm offering, she said. You're a practical person too. A man in your position doesn't get there by taking unnecessary risks. Holding him doesn't cost you the files. Let him go, and within 20 minutes you know exactly where they are. The silence this time was longer. She kept her breathing even. Eleanor's monitor, the refrigerator, the distant sound of Torres shifting his weight by the window. 20 minutes, Ventura said. And if you're wasting my time, I'm not wasting your time, she said. I have a daughter sleeping 15 feet from me. I don't have the luxury of playing games. Another pause. Then, he walks. You deliver. Yes. The line went quiet, but didn't end. She heard movement on his end. A hand over the receiver, a brief exchange she couldn't parse. Then the sound of something changing in the room at that location, some reorganization of bodies and positions. Her phone buzzed. Torres's radio hissed. Chen looked at her phone and said quietly, He's moving. Russo's moving toward the exit. Serena gripped the counter. Her knuckles went white and she let them. There was no one to perform steadiness for in this specific moment. Torres said, He's out. He's out of the building. Tactical team has him. She exhaled. One complete exhale, the whole compressed reservoir of the last 20 minutes. Then Ventura's voice came back on the line. Ms. Whitmore? The files. One moment, she said, and Chen was already on her radio and Reyes was already moving and the tactical team was already repositioning and the thing Serena had bought was exactly what she'd told Reyes she'd buy. 20 minutes and a federal record of Marco Ventura explicitly soliciting stolen evidence in exchange for the release of a man he'd been holding under physical threat. Mr. Ventura, she said, and her voice was as level as it had been when she'd stood in that doorway 7 months ago and looked at her husband asleep in their bed with another woman and decided, in the silence, what she was going to do. You should know that this entire conversation has been recorded by the Federal Bureau of Investigation. Agent Reyes would like to speak with you now. She held the phone out to Chen. She walked to the doorway of the back bedroom. Eleanor was awake. She had woken up somewhere in the last 5 minutes. She was on her back in the crib looking at the ceiling with the particular expression she used for ceilings, which she seemed to find, on balance, interesting. She heard Serena in the doorway and turned her head and looked at her mother with those dark, assessment-gathering eyes. Serena went to the crib and picked her daughter up and held her and stood in the center of the small institutional bedroom while outside the door the organized chaos of federal law enforcement executing what Reyes would later describe in documents Serena would eventually read as a successful tactical operation reorganized itself around the shape Serena had made for it. She pressed her face into Eleanor's hair. Her phone buzzed. A text from a number she didn't have saved but recognized from the last 48 hours of recognizing numbers she hadn't saved. I'm out. You didn't have to do that. She looked at the text for a long moment. Eleanor grabbed a fistful of her shirt with the focused determination she brought to everything she wanted. She typed back, Yes, I did. She put the phone in her pocket. She kept holding her daughter. Through the door, she heard Chen's voice, efficient and calm, and Reyes's voice on speakerphone, and the sounds of an operation concluding. The specific sounds of a threat being contained, of the walls holding. She stood in the room until her breathing had fully returned to normal, until the counting in her head had gone quiet. Until Eleanor, satisfied with the investigation of the shirt, had turned her attention back to Serena's face with that expression that was not yet a smile but was something in the territory of recognition. It's okay, Serena said. She said it the way she said everything now. Not as performance, not as comfort, she wasn't certain she could back up, but as a statement of what she intended to make true through whatever it cost her to make it true. We're okay. Eleanor looked at her with the ancient, unimpressed, and deeply attentive face of someone who required more than words before she'd render a verdict, and who had, it appeared, inherited this particular quality from exactly the right, He was waiting in the parking lot of the Federal Safe House when Reyes's car brought her out. Serena saw him before the car had fully stopped, standing by the black SUV that one of his remaining security people had brought, jacket open despite the May cold, and he had the particular stillness of someone who has been standing in one place long enough that the body has made peace with waiting. He was not pacing. He was not on his phone. He was just standing there with his hands at his sides and his face turned toward the entrance. And when the car stopped and she got out with Eleanor in the carrier against her chest, he looked at them the way a man looks at something he was not certain he was going to see again. She walked to him. The distance was maybe 30 feet, and she covered it with Eleanor's weight warm against her sternum, and her bag over one shoulder, and her shoes on the wet asphalt, and the whole ordinary physical fact of moving through space, which she had been doing all her life without noting it, which she was noting now. She stopped in front of him. "You're hurt," she said. It wasn't a question. She could see it, the way he was holding his left side slightly off register, the jacket not quite concealing the bulk of what she suspected was field dressing beneath it. "It's manageable." "How bad?" "2 cracked ribs, maybe 3. Ventura's guy connected before the tactical team moved. He said it flatly, the way you report damage to something that belongs to someone else. "It's fine." "It's not fine." "No," he agreed, "but it's survivable." Eleanor from the carrier had located Damien and was doing what she did with faces she recognized, the focused inventory, the gathering of data, the expression that was her version of hello. He looked at her, and the stillness in him shifted into something that wasn't stillness at all, just something that looked like it from a distance. He reached out and put one finger against Eleanor's fist, and she closed her hand around it with the automatic trust she extended to very few people, and Serena watched this and did not look away. "Come inside," she said. "You need to have those ribs looked at properly." "Serena?" "Come inside, Damien." He came inside. That Reyes debriefed them separately and then together in the functional kitchen of the safe house, with Torres taking notes and Chen producing coffee that was better than the space suggested it should be. The debrief took 3 hours. Eleanor sat in a bouncy seat that Torres had produced from somewhere with the focused efficiency of a man who had prepared for all contingencies, and she observed the proceedings with her characteristic attention and offered no opinions. The summary, as Reyes laid it out in the particular institutional language of federal operations, Marco Ventura had been taken into custody outside the Wicker Park location at 9:41 p.m. The extortion solicitation was on record. Serena's call, clean and complete. Ventura's explicit confirmation of the arrangement detailed enough to constitute a federal charge that Reyes described as airtight, with the particular satisfaction of someone who had spent 14 months building toward this. 2 of Ventura's associates had been apprehended at the location. A third had been identified and was currently the subject of a separate operation. The Kellerman files and the 6 protected witnesses remained intact. Marcus Webb remained in protective custody at an undisclosed location. His cooperation agreement stood. He would not return to Chicago. "And my case," Damien said. Reyes set down her coffee. She looked at him with the same professionally neutral expression she'd deployed throughout, but something underneath it was different now. The expression of a person who has moved from the investigative phase of a relationship to something that doesn't have a clean institutional category. The U.S. Attorney's Office has agreed to a reduced exposure framework in exchange for your cooperation in the Ventura prosecution, she said. That means testimony, documentation, and full disclosure on 3 specific operations that the DOJ has been building cases around. In exchange, the federal charges related to the distribution and racketeering aspects of your organization are being structured under a plea agreement that carries no custodial sentence subject to conditions. The kitchen was very quiet. "What conditions?" he said. "Full divestment of all criminal operations within 12 months, documented transition to legitimate business activity, ongoing compliance monitoring for 5 years." She paused. "And a formal cooperation agreement with the FBI on any future organized crime intelligence you're in a position to provide." Damien looked at the table. He looked at it for a long time. Then he looked up at Serena, who was sitting across from him with her coffee cup and her straight back, and her face that was giving him nothing he could use to decide what she thought he should do. She had made that choice deliberately, she realized, somewhere in the last 3 hours. This was his decision. She was not going to make it for him. "Okay," he said to Reyes. "I'll need my own legal team at the table." "Of course. And I want a timeline in writing before anything is signed. We can have preliminary documents to your counsel within 72 hours. He nodded once, the nod of a man who has just agreed to dismantle the only world he has ever operated in, and knows it, and is doing it anyway. Reyes closed her folder. "We're done for tonight." She stood, and Torres and Chen stood, and there was a moment of the organized dispersal of federal agents from a room, coats, and cases, and the efficient ritual of departure. At the kitchen doorway, Reyes stopped. She looked at Serena. "For what it's worth," she said, "what you did tonight was not something I've seen before, in 14 months of this investigation." She didn't elaborate. She walked out. The safe house kitchen was very quiet. Damien looked at the table. Eleanor looked at Damien. Serena looked at Eleanor. "I need to sleep," Serena said. "Yeah," he said. She picked up Eleanor and went to the back bedroom and lay down on the narrow institutional bed with her daughter on her chest, and she was asleep in 4 minutes, which was the fastest she had fallen asleep in 7 months. Victor Russo died 6 weeks later. She heard from Damien in a text, brief and factual. "My father died this morning. Heart." And then, after a pause that she could feel in the gap between messages, he asked about Eleanor at the end. "I told him she was doing well." She sat with that for a moment. Then she typed back, "I'm sorry for your loss." She meant it plainly, without subtext, because the man had been what he was, and had made what he made, and the grief his son was carrying was real, regardless of what it was grief for. She went to the funeral. She had not planned to. She had decided twice that she wasn't going, and then she had gotten dressed in a dark blazer and put Eleanor in the navy dress Claire had bought her and driven to the funeral home in Evanston, and when she walked in and found a seat near the back and Damien turned and saw her from the front of the room, the expression on his face was the one she had been cataloging for 7 years and had never seen before. Unguarded, unmanaged, simply hit by something it wasn't prepared for. She nodded at him. He nodded back. She sat through the service, and she held Eleanor, who was now 7 months old and had developed an opinion about formal occasions, namely that they were acceptable as long as someone interesting was available to look at. Afterward, in the parking lot, he came to find her. "You didn't have to come," he said. "I know." "Why did you?" She adjusted Eleanor on her hip. The baby was looking at a tree near the parking lot with the concentrated intensity she brought to the natural world. "Because you're her father," she said, "and he was her grandfather. And those things are true regardless of everything else." He stood in the afternoon light with his hands in the pockets of his dark coat and his ribs, she knew, still not fully healed, and he looked at her with an honesty she hadn't seen him deploy in daylight, in the open, without the architecture of a strategic conversation around it. "He told me something," Damien said. "In the hospital the last week. He told me that he'd never been faithful to my mother. Not once in 31 years. He said it without effect, just reporting. He said he thought that was what it meant to be the kind of man he was, that it was part of the structure of the thing." A pause. "He wasn't apologizing, he was explaining, like he thought it was important for me to understand the logic." Serena said nothing. "I spent a week sitting with that," he said, "trying to figure out if it changes anything, if it explains me the way my therapist has been suggesting, whether the origin makes it different." He looked at Eleanor, who had abandoned the tree and found his face. "It doesn't," he said. "I've decided it doesn't. The origin is information. What I did with it was still mine." "Yes," she said. "It was. I just needed you to know that I know that." Eleanor reached toward him, a sudden decisive extension of both arms in his direction, the gesture she deployed when she had made a determination about where she wanted to be. Serena looked at her daughter's outstretched arms, and then at Damien, and then she passed Eleanor to him, which she had not done outside of the supervised context since any of this had started. He took Eleanor with the same careful terror of that first visit. She recognized it, and Eleanor grabbed the lapel of his dark coat and pulled herself upright against his chest with the purposeful athleticism she'd been developing, and she looked at the parking lot from this new elevation with an expression of profound satisfaction. He held his daughter in a funeral home parking lot, and he didn't say anything for a long time, and Serena stood beside him in the afternoon and let the silence be what it was. The 12 months that followed were not a story. They were a practice. Damien's legal team and the U.S. Attorney's Office finalized the cooperation agreement in June. The divestment process began in July. A complicated, monitored unwinding of enterprises that had been built over a decade, conducted under the supervision of federal compliance officers who came through the offices on Wacker Drive once a month and reviewed documentation and asked questions that his new legitimate legal team answered. It was not clean. It was not fast. There were nights, she knew from the small things he said in the margins of their co-parenting conversations, when the architecture of what he was dismantling felt like removing load-bearing walls with bare hands and hoping the ceiling held. The ceiling held. Mostly. There were 2 incidents in the first 6 months. She didn't know the details and didn't ask, but she knew from the quality of his voice on certain Tuesday evenings when he called to check on Eleanor's developments that things were happening she wasn't being told, and she made the decision she had always made with his world, to not ask what she didn't need to know, because knowing it cost her things she needed for other purposes. Holloway managed the ongoing custody arrangements. The 12-month review came in March of the following year, and Serena attended with Holloway, and Damien attended with his attorney, and Phyllis from the Family Services Center submitted her monitor report, and the family court judge reviewed it all and modified the custody arrangement to include unsupervised visitation on alternating weekends and 1 weekday evening per week. Serena had known the review was coming. She had thought she'd known how she felt about the likely outcome. She had been wrong about that. Not about the decision, which she had made and meant, but about what it would feel like to sit in a courtroom and formally acknowledge that Damien Russo was a person to whom she was entrusting her daughter without a monitor in the corner with a clipboard. It felt like standing on a surface she couldn't fully see, and finding, when she put her weight on it, that it held. Eleanor was 14 months old at the first unsupervised visit. She went to Damien on a Saturday morning in April with her diaper bag and her opinions and a small stuffed rabbit named, by some private determination of Eleanor's own, Buh. And she returned Sunday evening sunburned from a morning at the park and full of a high-pitched report of everything she'd observed in the last 36 hours, delivered in the 40-word vocabulary she was currently assembling at speed. Serena stood at the door and listened to this report, and looked at her daughter's face, which was animated and complete. And then she looked at Damien, who was in the doorway with the diaper bag, and an expression of exhausted happiness that was the most unguarded she had seen his face since the parking lot at the funeral home, maybe, or since the Family Services Center the morning Eleanor had laughed for the first time. "She okay?" Serena said. "She's extraordinary," he said, simply, like it was a fact he was reporting. "Come in," she said. "I made coffee." He came in. He sat at the kitchen table of her apartment, the Wicker Park apartment she'd moved to after the Lincoln Square sublet, the one with the good light and the secured entry, and the second bedroom that had become, over the course of 14 months, something that fully deserved the word home. And she poured coffee, and they sat at the table while Eleanor conducted a detailed investigation of the cabinet she'd been recently told she was not allowed to open, which meant it now had her complete attention. "The Lakeview property closes next week," he said. "That's the last of the non-legitimate assets." "How does that feel?" He wrapped both hands around the coffee cup. "Like finishing something I didn't know how to start." A pause. "Strange. Like being in a room after all the furniture's been removed. You understand the geometry for the first time." She looked at her own cup. "What does the room look like?" "Smaller than I expected," he said, "and bigger." She understood that. She didn't say so out loud because some things landed better without annotation. Eleanor had gotten the cabinet open. She was pulling out the plastic storage containers with the systematic focus of someone conducting an inventory, setting each one on the floor beside her with careful deliberateness. Neither of them moved to stop her. The containers were just containers. The floor was just a floor. "I have something to ask you," Damien said. She looked at him. "Not today." he said quickly. I'm not I'm not asking today. I just want you to know that I have something to ask. So it's not a surprise when I ask it. So you have time. She looked at him for a long moment. He looked back, and the look was the honest one. The one she'd started seeing in the parking lot, and in the supervised visits, and in the hospital hallway outside Victor's room, and in the kitchen of the federal safe house. The one that had been arriving with increasing frequency over the course of 14 months as the performance had, layer by layer, become unsustainable. Okay, she said. Okay, you'll hear it. Or Okay, I'll hear it, she said. When you're ready to ask. He nodded. He picked up his coffee. Eleanor had now built a small structure out of the storage containers and was studying it with the critical eye of an architect assessing load distribution. She's going to be terrifying, Damien said. Not with alarm, with the particular awe of a parent discovering in real time who their child is becoming. Yes, Serena said. She is. He asked on an evening in November, 2 years after the night she had walked down that marble staircase and counted 11 minutes on a dead man's clock. He asked in her kitchen, which had become, over the course of many Tuesday evenings and weekend handoffs and occasional dinners that had started as practical co-parenting logistics, and had gradually become something harder to categorize, a room he moved through with the ease of someone who knew where things were kept and why. Eleanor was asleep. The apartment was quiet. They had been at the kitchen table long enough that the dinner dishes were cleared and the wine was mostly gone, and the particular quality of lateness had settled over the room. Not sleepiness, something more like the state pass sleepiness, where the usual defenses become more effort than they're worth. He put a small box on the table between them. Not a performance, not a setting arranged for effect. Just a box, placed on her kitchen table between the wine glasses and the remnants of the evening, and he looked at her across it, and he said, I'm not asking you to forget anything. I'm not asking you to pretend the last 2 years were something other than what they were. He stopped. I'm asking you to look at what I've actually done, not what I've said, what I've done, and decide if it's enough to build something new on. She looked at the box. She looked at him. She had been having this conversation with herself for months. She had been having it honestly, without the protection of certainty, which was the only way she knew how to have it. She had made arguments on both sides with equal rigor, the way she made arguments about anything that mattered, pressing on the weak points, refusing to accept conclusions that couldn't hold their own weight. The conclusion she'd arrived at was not certainty. She did not think certainty was the right ambition for a thing like this, not anymore. She had been certain before, and certain had been a story she'd told herself about a situation she hadn't looked at directly. What she had now was evidence. 2 years of accumulated evidence. His consistency, his failures, his corrections, his patience with Eleanor, his patience with her, the specific quality of his presence at Victor's funeral and in the federal safe house and in the chair across the table from a U.S. attorney agreeing to dismantle the only life he'd known. She had evidence of what he did when it cost him something. That was the only evidence that had ever mattered. I know what you've done, she said. And she reached across the table and opened the box herself. The ring inside was different from the one he'd given her the first time. Simpler, no display, just a clean band with a single stone, the kind of thing chosen for what it actually was rather than for what it communicated about the person giving it. She looked at it for a moment. Then she looked at him. Ask me, she said. He asked her. She said yes the way she made every decision she meant. Without performance, without the architecture of a moment constructed for an audience, just the clean and accountable weight of choosing something with full knowledge of what she was choosing. No illusions, no version of the future that required him to be someone he was not, or the past to be something it wasn't. Just this man, this table, this ring, this evidence, and the room past the kitchen where their daughter was sleeping with the total unconscious confidence of someone who had never had reason to doubt that the people she belonged to would hold. She put the ring on her own finger. He watched her do it. The expression on his face was the same one she'd first seen in the parking lot of the funeral home, unmanaged, unguarded, simply receiving something it hadn't been certain was coming. We're doing this differently, she said. I know. Everything on the table. Always. No operational silences. No information I'm not supposed to have. If something is happening in your world that affects this family, I know. Yes. And if you ever... She stopped. Not because she couldn't finish it, but because she was being precise, choosing the exact words. If you ever make the choice you made before, in any form, in any direction, I leave, permanently. No mediation, no supervised visits as leverage. Eleanor and I simply go and we don't come back. I understand that. I need you to understand it not as a consequence I'm threatening, she said, but as a fact of the structure. The same way you'd understand a load-bearing wall. He nodded. I understand it that way. She picked up her wine glass. He picked up his. They sat in the kitchen in the particular quiet of two people who have survived something together and are choosing to go forward into something different. And different was not the same as easy, and it was not the same as certain, and it was also not the same as over. Outside, the November city made its ordinary sounds. Somewhere in the building, a door closed. Eleanor breathed in the next room with the deep authority of someone who had decided, from the first moments of her life, to be exactly who she was going to be. Bashem. The wedding was small, not because it needed to be hidden. The compliance officers knew, Reyes knew, Holloway knew, and Serena had precisely zero interest in managing anyone else's knowledge of her own life. It was small because small was what was honest. A courthouse ceremony with Claire as witness and Damien's one remaining friend from before all of it, a man named Hector, who had not been part of the organization and had been waiting with the patient loyalty of someone who understood that the door had not been closed, just not yet opened. Eleanor was the only other attendee. She wore the navy dress again, which still fit, barely, and she spent the ceremony pulling at the hem of Serena's dress with alternating determination and distraction. When the clerk asked if Serena took this man, Eleanor said something in her developing vocabulary that might have been her version of the word yes, and might have been a commentary on the hem of the dress, and no one asked for clarification because the room was already what it needed to be. They signed the papers. Damien held Eleanor while Serena signed, and Eleanor used the opportunity to grab his lapel again, the same gesture she had performed in the funeral home parking lot, the same proprietary grip. Claire hugged Serena in the hallway outside the clerk's office and held on a few seconds longer than a regular hug, which was Claire's version of everything she didn't say out loud, and Serena held on the same way, which was hers. In the car afterward, Eleanor asleep in her car seat before they'd cleared the parking structure, the accumulated excitement of the day finally exhausting even her. Damien drove and Serena sat in the passenger seat with her hand in her lap, and the ring on her finger and the city moving past the windows in the particular afternoon light of a November day that was cold and bright and entirely itself. "Are you okay?" he asked. She thought about it, actually thought rather than answering reflexively. "Yes," she said. "What kind of okay?" She looked out the window. "The real kind," she said. "The kind where I'm not performing it." He drove. The city moved. Eleanor breathed in the back. "Me too," he said. She looked at his hands on the wheel, steady as they always were, but different now in the way that everything familiar becomes different when you've stripped it down to the studs and rebuilt it with better materials. She knew these hands. She knew what they were capable of and what they had chosen not to do and what they had learned at significant cost to hold carefully. She reached over and covered one of them with hers. He turned his palm up without looking away from the road, and her hand rested in his, and neither of them said anything else, because there was nothing else that was necessary. This was not the story she had written for herself when she was 24 years old and falling in love with a man she didn't fully understand. That story had been built on the assumption that love was a condition you arrived at and then maintained by not looking at it too closely. It had been a beautiful story, and it had been a lie. This was a different story, built on what could be seen in full light, on what had been tested and had held, and also on what had broken and been replaced with something that bore the evidence of the break in its structure, not hidden, not disguised, but there, part of the material, the way repaired things carry the history of their damage and are sometimes stronger for it. There were 2 children now. A son would come in the spring, She had told Damien on a Sunday morning 3 months ago, in this same car, pulled over in a parking lot because she'd needed to see his face and he'd needed to pull over after she said it. The son who would grow up in a house where the parents had decided, with full knowledge of what they were deciding, to be honest with each other about everything it cost. The city gave way to the quieter streets of the neighborhood and the familiar geometry of the blocks approaching the apartment, and Eleanor continued her deep and total sleep in the back seat, and Serena kept her hand in Damien's hand, and the November light went gold and then gray as the afternoon moved toward evening, ordinary and unrepeatable, the way all things are that are genuinely real. She had walked out of a house with a carry-on bag and sat on a step and counted 11 minutes and decided who she was. She had walked through the next 2 years one decision at a time, each one made with eyes open, none of them taken back. This was where they had landed. Not the destination she'd imagined, not the ruin she'd braced for. Something that had been made by hand, in the dark, tested to its limits, and found, when she pressed her full weight on it, to be capable of holding what she needed it to hold. She looked out the window at the city that had always been hers, before any of the rest of it, and she felt, in the quiet of the car and the warmth of his hand and the sound of her daughter breathing, something that did not require a name to be what it was. She let it be what it was, P.